Okay, so this is the mid-segment theorem. So mid-segment of a triangle is a segment that connects the two midpoints of two sides of a triangle. So for instance, if I had a triangle, and this were the midpoint of this side, and this were the midpoint of this side, that segment that connects those two midpoints is called the mid-segment. So for the first example, we want to show, number one, that the two segments are parallel, and we want to show that the mid-segment is also half the length of the base. So for starters, we need to find the coordinates of M and N. So again, remember from one of the first sections we did, to find the midpoint, we're just going to take the average of the x values and the y's. So to find point M, this is my x1, y1, x2, y2, and we're going to find the average of the x's, find the average of the y's, and that gives me point M. Then I do the same thing for point N. So x1, y1, x2, y2 is already labeled, and again, find the average, x plus x divided by 2, y plus y divided by 2, and now we have the points for N. Once we do that, in order to determine if they're parallel, we need to find out what their slopes are. Okay, we know that two segments that have the same slope are parallel. So using the points that we have for M and N, okay, we can call again one of these x1, y1, and x2, y2. And remember that slope is a change in y over the change in x. Okay. Then we do the same thing again, but now we're going to use, that was for MN. Okay, so these points were for this one right here. For JK, we would have used these points up here. And again, just the same process, plugging into the slope formula to find the slope. We see here that the slopes are the same, so these lines are in fact parallel. So that's one of the properties we're going to talk about, is that a mid-segment is parallel to its base. The next part we need to talk about is the length of each of them. So in order to do that, we're going to use the distance formula. Remember that distance formula is x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. And again, if we plug in our values for j and k, when we simplify that, we're going to get 2 radical 10. And we plug in our points for M and N. When we simplify that, we get radical 10. So JK is 2 times the length of MN. Right? So that's our other property. So the two important properties we have to know are that the mid-segment and its base are parallel, and that the mid-segment is half of the base, and that's summarized right here on this slide. So, nice simple problem for UW and VW. We're given that they're mid-segments, and again, we can also tell that by the markings on the drawing, showing us that they're midpoints by showing us that the side is bisected. Okay, so to find UW, because it's the mid-segment and parallel to this base, it would just be half of that base. So half of 12 is 6. Okay, the second part, they're giving me the mid-segment, VW, and asking me to find RT. So I'm just going to double it, and I get 16. Okay. In triangle ABC, M is the midpoint. So again, we can fill in all this information. So if we're told that these points are, I'm skipping right to 3 through 9 over here. Okay, so we're told these are the midpoints. That means this piece is congruent here, this piece is congruent here, and this piece is congruent here. Therefore, this is 10.6, this one will be 8, and each of these will be 12. Okay, again, knowing the mid-segment is going to be half of that side, this would also be 12. This whole length is 16, which means half of that would be 8. And this whole side would be 21.2, which means this would also be 10.6. We can now use that information to fill in these problems over here. So JH, okay, would be parallel to, JH here, would be parallel to side DF. this part is asking us what would be parallel to side DE. So we're looking, side DE is up here. So parallel to that will be side GH. The length of EF, we said each of those were 10.6, which means the whole thing will be 21.2. GH we already found to be 12. DF, if each of these are 8, this whole thing will be 16. JH we already found to be 8. And to find the perimeter, this side is 16. This side we're told is 24. And this side we said was 21.2. We can add all those up. 24 plus 16 plus 21.2. And that would give us this would give us 61.2. Okay. For this top part over here that I skipped, in triangle ABC, if M is the midpoint of AB, so let's draw a triangle and label it A, B, C. M is the midpoint of side AB. N is the midpoint of AC. And P is the midpoint of BC. Then N, M, all these segments would be mid-segments. Okay, and that's all we're going to talk about in this section.